Hi, guys. We want to thank our great sponsor, Legion M. They are the first fan-owned entertainment company. We love working with them. They create really incredible experiences for people. If you're someone who wants to feel like you own a piece and are a piece of the industry, it's a great way to do it. They do meetups all over the country. They have a really cool community going online. I cannot recommend them enough. Go to legionm.com for more information.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leonard Maltin.
And I'm Jessie Maltin.
And you're listening to Maltin on Movies. And we are coming to you today from the Jean Cocteau Cinema in lovely Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we are sitting here with its proprietor, George R.R. Martin. And thank you so much for welcoming us here.
Oh, my pleasure, and welcome to Santa Fe and the land of enchantment.
Oh, yes. We're those horrible people where when you say you should come visit sometime, we did it. So this is the, I should say, we met last year at Harlan Ellison's memorial. You've heard me talk about him a bit.
Not the best occasion, but...
No, but for Harlan, always worth it. We love him so much, and we miss him. And I try to talk about him as much as possible.
Amazing writer.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing human being.
One of a kind, certainly. We
yes.
We shall not see his like again.
No. The stories flow. The stories flow when you start talking about Harlan. But you create stories that people talk about and are talking about. And you are, by creating what became Game of Thrones, and which just concluded recently on HBO, you've made an incredible dent in our popular culture.
You made a dent. That's the dream, Daddy. That's what he always hoped for, to make a dent.
It has been a little surreal, the whole experience of that. I mean, obviously, whenever you're connected with a television show or movie or book, you want it to be successful. But the scale of success that Game of Thrones has, reaching all over the world, and invading the culture to such an extent that constant references in other movies and television shows and on the news and politicians using it. It's been, that's not something anyone could ever anticipate, not something I ever expect to experience again, and there have been some surreal moments in it, but it's been quite a ride.
Like people who named their children after your characters.
Yes, a number of them.
That's
they
a thing.
Often send me the pictures of the babies. And say, look,
doesn't this one look just like Cersei? Yeah, that's
little Daenerys kindergarten teachers are going to hate me when
I was going to say,
with the A and the Y, when all these little Daeneryses start hitting school.
Imagine what the mugs are going to look like at Disneyland in a few years' time. We're going to have Mickey hats. And it's going to be like little baby Westeros is running around.
Also, pets, of course. I have many pictures of cats, dogs, lizards, iguanas. Various things that people have named have taken names from Westeros.
Wow. And as you say, this is not anything anyone could possibly plan or chart in their lives. And what I find interesting, we're going to rewind and go back to your beginnings in just a moment, but on this particular topic, you sat in a room by yourself writing. That's where this began.
Right.
That's how it always begins. And that was more than 20 years ago that the first book...
1991 was when I began it. So long time ago.
Mm-hmm. I just marvel at the idea that you could let your imagination run and roam free. And that's the beauty of writing fantasy, of course. And I can't imagine what it was like for your colleagues to translate that into a physical production. Because the scale of it is so enormous.
Yeah, it was an amazing challenge, and honestly, one I didn't think could be done. I had worked, although I began with books and short stories in the magazines and novels. as a prose writer, I did spend about 10 years in Hollywood working in television and film, writing screenplays and serving as a writer-producer on various television shows and trying to develop some of my own, roughly 1985 to 1995. And although I did pretty well during those 10 years, there was a theme that I always got when I turned in a script, which was, George, we love this, but it's way too expensive. We can't shoot this. Our budget won't allow it. You have to scale it down. Please, I have too many characters. Please eliminate half of them. This requires 12 matte paintings. We have the budget for 2. Too many settings. And could you please, this battle at the end where there's 10,000 people on each side, could you make that a duel between the hero and the villain? And I would do these things. I mean, that's the job. I was a professional, but I always liked my first drafts better. And at a certain point, I got so tired of that when I went back to books and I started this, I said, I am writing a series of novels here. I don't have to worry about the budget. I don't have to worry about what's producible. I'm going to write something that's as big as my imagination. I can have as many settings as I want. I can have as many characters as I can want. I can have castles that are like no castle ever built on Earth. I can have dragons. I can have direwolves. I can have battles with thousands and thousands of people on each side. And no, it'll never be made into television or film. It's
That'd be
absolutely
crazy. No.
unproducible. But I'm writing books, so I don't care about that. And as irony would have it, of course, that is what became the biggest hit in television and the thing which my name will always be associated, as opposed to all of the shows and movies that I wrote in the early 90s, deliberately designed to be a television show or to be producible, to be something that we could do. So it's just life will throw you these curveballs once in a while. And
Yeah.
I many years ago, when I first got involved in television and film, I asked my then agent at the time, well, I've never written a screenplay. What background? Is there a good book I should read to tell me about the format? And he said, there's some how to do it books, but the one you want to read is William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade. And indeed, that was an amazing book. So, and I'm reading that, and of course, one of his maxims is nobody knows anything. And my experience with Game of Thrones just confirms that William Goldman had it right. Nobody knows anything. Don't believe anyone when they tell you what's producible, what's not producible. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
And where there's a budget. And
Yes.
thankfully, HBO came in and
Wrote the checks.
and they were pretty substantial checks. But it all ended up on screen.
We just watched the documentary
Right.
that was done, and first of all, it's a wonderful documentary. For anybody who hasn't seen it, it's an HBO doc, and it focused a lot on the background characters, the folks in Ireland who've been working on the show since day one, the costume design, the makeup, sort of away a bit from the leads, which was nice because obviously they get profiled all the time. It was really cool to see it come together. And the thing that stuck with me was they said every episode is like making a movie. It's that scale. And when you see it, it really is. And how fascinating, like what you're saying, which is because you didn't have any limit.
David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the showrunners and main writers on the show, just did an amazing job of putting that team together. And, as irony would have it, neither one of them had any experience in television when I signed up to do this with them. And maybe it was because they had no experience in television. They didn't know what was possible, so they reached for the impossible and achieved it. But they put together a sensational team. I mean, Game of Thrones has at this point we have the record for the most Emmys of any scripted show. And yes, we've won 3 times now for best drama, and David and Dan have won for writing, and a couple of our directors have won, and Peter Dinklage has won for acting. But all the rest of our Emmys are below the line things. You know, stunt work, special effects, music, costuming. You know, all of these things, and it's essential that you have those people, and those are not the heralded people the way the actors and to some extent the showrunners or the writers or directors get the attention. But if you don't have good below the line people, and I assume your listeners know the Hollywood jargon of above the line, below the line.
Well, and you've just explained it pretty well.
Yeah.
Then you're not going to get a top product. You know, you really have to create a world, especially in fantasy.
Yeah.
That's a convincing world.
One of the things that I find actually contradictory, so perhaps you can illuminate me, is that I read a quote of yours that you don't like doing outlines.
I don't. No.
But you wrote.
I did when I was in Hollywood because they required it of me.
Right.
Right. But you did set out to write a multi-book series when you embarked on this.
Well, initially only 3. It was, you know, in 1994 when I sold the series, it was supposed to be 3 books. But as I actually wrote it and the plot got more complicated and more secondary and tertiary characters came in and the world got bigger and bigger, pretty soon I realized I was not going to be able to do it in 3 books. And then for a while I said 4, then I said 6. I skipped right over 5. I never said 5. And, you know, and then, you know, there were a number of years there where I was saying 6 books, and my wife Paris would stand behind me holding up 7 fingers. So, and then
They
I
always
finally
know.
succumbed and said, "Yeah, it'll be 7 books." And of course, I'm still trying to do it in 7 books, but I got to get the 6th book in, and which is way late because I'm slow.
But not having an outline, does that necessarily mean you don't know where you're going to wind up?
You know, I like to use the analogy of a trip. You know, if I set out to drive from New York City to Los Angeles, you know, I would look at a map and I would try to scan. Well, how many miles can I get today? And all right, I'll stop. I'll stop the first night in Pittsburgh or something, and then I'll go to Chicago, and I'll look at the routes I'll take and all that. So I know, you know, in writing the book, I know the broad strokes. I know where I want to wind up at the end. I know the major road marks along the way that I'm going to do. Like on a trip, I might set out and say, well, I want to see the Grand Canyon while I'm there, and I have friends in Chicago. I'll visit with them for a few days. But what you don't know is all the details. You don't know where the road is going to be closed and you have to take a detour. You don't know what kind of diner you're going to stop at for the first night, or what hotel you're going to pull into for the second night. You discover that along the way, and that's what makes it an adventure. And for me, writing is partly that too. That's partly the charm of it. I mean, I discovered very early in my career that if I did outline, if I talked too much about what the story is going to be, then writing it really became a chore because haven't I done this already? This all feels old. It feels like, you know, it feels like someone made me go back and rewrite a story that, you know, I've written a lot of stories in my life, but, you know, if you told me that I had to go back and rewrite Sand King, say my most famous story, that would be, well, I did that already. I did that. There it is. I don't want to do it all over again. And writing from a very detailed outline sometimes feels like that to me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
That's a perfect segue into your show and tell.
well, all right. You started as a fan, and I want to talk about that because fandom has, of course, become such a force in the world, a force in literature, a force in commerce, a force.
I'm still
in
a fan,
movies,
really.
and which is great, which is as it should be.
And that's what makes you a good writer. That's what makes you a good anything, is you have to still love it. If you don't love it, then why?
Yeah.
You know?
But when you and I, we're about the same age, and we both grew up in different parts of New Jersey. The idea of something like the internet, it wasn't even imagined. The most fanciful science fiction writer, I don't think, could have dreamt of that, and of all the things that have come along with it. I started out, as you did, in the world of fanzines,
Right.
and we have to explain what they were and what they meant to us.
Amateur magazines
Yep.
put together by fans, with print runs ranging into the dozens in some cases. Most of them were produced either on a mimeograph machine, which was the high-class ones, or a process called Ditto, which, involved trays of gelatin and masters that had produced purple print for whatever reason.
That's right. Those were used in schools quite often in those days.
Right.
Now, you also, in an autobiographical essay you wrote, used a word that I have never seen anywhere else except in my own experience. You know what a hectograph is.
If you could have seen the joy on that man's face when he read the
And
word
the hectograph is a vat of hardened gelatin
Yeah.
that would take an impression from a ditto stencil. You would sponge it down and lay down the ditto stencil on which you had typed or drawn or done whatever you want to do. And then by using slightly coated paper, you could lay down one sheet at a time and then peel it off the gelatin, and it would leave a copy. My friend and I called it a 35ograph because it started getting blurry around
Right.
there in
Right.
our experience. So it never got to the hecto stage, but who's complaining? I just want to show you quickly. This is my fanzine
profile
in
was
the
first
mimeograph
one.
stage
Oh, wow.
after we graduated from the hectograph. And it's on paper so cheap and flimsy that it crumbles even as you thumb it. But
Now, what year were these?
1964, the
Wow.
ones that you're holding in your hands.
And this
And
is a movie fanzine.
it's a movie
Yeah.
fanzine. My best friend at the time was interested in magic. So we also did articles about notable magicians.
I mostly came up from comic book fanzines.
Yes.
And another friend of mine was into that and went to Phil Seuling's first Comic-Con in New York, and et cetera.
My dad's movie nerdum started young.
And we
The
tried to.
pages are upside down in this second.
Yes, there's one that is
Picky,
right.
picky.
miscollated. Is that the word?
Sure.
I guess, yes.
Yeah. But that's where I come from, and so it took me by surprise,
Amazing.
a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
That you had that too. Our next step was that we spent the money to do a cover that was
Oh.
offset printed by a local printer.
That's right.
The rest of it was still mimeographed, and what you hold in your hands is just the shell, but it dressed it up a little bit. We thought, well,
Thurston and
that's worth
Charlie
doing.
Chaplin. Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Fancy.
And then,
We have a lot of magic shows here at the Jean Cocteau.
oh yeah,
Yeah, about 4 or 5 times a year we bring in a magician. It's
Oh, great.
always pretty popular. You don't get
I'll
that a lot. in
bet.
Santa
I would
Fe.
think so. Then I inherited, or actually purchased, an existing fanzine from Vancouver called Film Fan Monthly when I was 15 years old. And this one was completely offset printed by a local printing
Right.
place. But I typed it all on a borrowed IBM Selectric typewriter.
High tech, man. No Selectrics.
Oh man, that was the Cadillac of typewriters.
I was writing mine on a manual typewriter.
And what I did, though, I wanted to justify the right-hand margins, so I typed
yeah.
every page twice. First, the way it came out, and then I would put little dots on the page, on each line, to skip spaces so that it would come out justified in the right-hand margin. You don't have to be crazy, but it helps.
Yeah,
I
that's
did that for
pretty
9
amazing.
years.
Well, I never actually published my own fanzine. I just sent stories off to other people's fanzines.
Your nerd was not deep enough yet.
Well, I had no room in the projects there for a tray of gelatin, or let alone a mimeograph machine. Those things were expensive.
Teaneck was,
That's right.
Teaneck was a fancy place, you know.
I was given a used one that wasn't completely operative by a cousin of my father's. So I didn't buy it. I sort of inherited it. But I digress.
And what did Profile sell for?
Gosh, I don't remember.
A lot of them sold for a quarter. So
Well-
you would get the quarter mailed to you, scotch taped to an index card, and when you peeled it off, it would be sticky. So people referred to sticky quarters.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Now again, we didn't even have photocopying machines then.
Right.
Xerography had not been invented when I was doing this.
I remember the first photocopying machine I ever saw was at the Bayonne Public Library.
Public library, exactly.
And I was writing a fantasy stuff back then, epic fantasy, and I had drawn a map, and I wanted to reproduce the map, so I went in and I put in my quarter or whatever it was into the photocopy, but it reversed it. Those early photocopying machines, it produced white print on black. On black, so that that's what the maps were. There was a whole. I thought it was actually kind of cool. A whole black page with the cities and the rivers and the stuff and the landmasses in white.
How wild!
It opened a world to us, to young aspiring writers.
It did,
and it also put us in contact with other people who shared our passion,
with other fans all over the world. And now, of course, the internet has taken that to up several orders of magnitude, and now you can tweet and Facebook, but I don't know if it's an improvement. The internet is toxic in a way that the old fanzine culture and the fandoms, the comic fandom and science fiction fandom of those days was not. I mean, there were disagreements, there were feuds, but nothing like the sort of madness that you see on
because
the
it would
internet.
take effort. The internet requires no effort. If you want to be angry, you just go and it echoes. With those, you'd have to write a letter, an angry letter,
and you'd have to attach your name to it.
But that's it. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
It
Indeed.
did not empower anonymity. The coward's mean of discourse.
Yes, indeed.
That is the fanciest and nicest way I've ever.
Yeah, but it was a wonderful world, and I think. The likes of you and I benefited from it, and took a lot from it. And you, of course, have taken it to heights unimagined at the time.
The King of Bayonne.
Well, I have just been voted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to Asbury Park in October to be
Mazel
inducted.
tov.
great.
That's very exciting.
That's very cool.
Yes, indeed. So, what was your first professional sale of a story? Do you remember?
Sure. A story called The Hero that I sold to Galaxy magazine in 1970, appeared in 1971.
Wow.
And do you remember what you were paid for it?
$94,
Hey.
which was a lot of money in those days.
Yes.
No, it's not bad.
That was pretty cool. Yeah.
Did they send it in quarters taped to index cards?
No,
or
they actually sent me a check.
Ooh, fancy.
Very nice.
And then I sold my second story to Fantastic magazine, but that one only paid me like $25. So I was disappointed in my. I thought I would get another, close to 100.
Yeah.
No, Fantastic didn't pay as well as Galaxy. So you learn these lessons here.
Did you ever consult any books in the library about a marketplace for freelance writing?
Well, there were the reference books like Literary Marketplace or Writer's Market. I looked at those from time to time. There was a book by L. Sprague de Camp called The Science Fiction Handbook. It wasn't particularly about marketplaces, but it was about how to write science fiction and be a professional writer. And they had that at the Bayonne Public Library, and I would take that out and read it, and then I'd have to return it, and then I'd take it out again. So you looked at, in those days, in the back there was actually a card of who had taken out, and I could look and say, well, I'm the only person taking this out. I keep taking it out over and over again.
I had that experience at the Teaneck Public Library, indeed. Right. And of course they had a little rubber stamp with a date stamp that they would indicate when you had taken it out and when you'd taken it out again. And again.
And you had to return it, otherwise you'd get, they'd charge you like a nickel or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Overdue
punitive
books.
penalty here.
And that was verboten. When and how did you advance to being a professional? At what age and how did it come about?
Well, I think I was 21 when I sold The Hero. So technically, that was then a professional. That was the first story. I had published a number of stories in fanzines, but that was the first one I actually got any money for. I had tried before that with some stories. I had collected a few rejection slips. And after that, I continued to write stories and sell stories through the 70s. But although it was a nice supplement to my income, but it was by no means enough to live on, even though I was living, pretty not an expensive lifestyle in those days. I was living in a bad neighborhood in Chicago in an old rundown apartment with 5 roommates, and we all shared the rent and utilities and things like that. But even so, nothing you could live on. So I always had to have day jobs.
How did you end up in Chicago?
I went to Northwestern and got my degrees in journalism, masters and in 70 or bachelor's in 70, masters in 71, and then I continued to stay in the Chicago area afterwards. So I ran chess tournaments for a while. I was a Vista volunteer for a while. I got a teaching job, teaching journalism. Various types of jobs to keep the rent on the table. Sold my first novel in 77, though, just as I had accepted a teaching job. But the novel got a substantial sum of money, more than I would have thought. I timed it perfectly, not because I was smart or anything. I was just really, really lucky. And that said, well, I should try this full time, because it's, I was writing even while I was teaching, but there's a limited amount of time. You write weekends, you write on vacations and all that. But so it was 1979 when I moved here to Santa Fe. I'd been living in Iowa then. That's where the teaching job was.
You were teaching in Iowa, right?
Yes. Clark College in Dubuque, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there from 76 through 79. Actually, it was a sort of a sad event that galvanized me. I had a friend in Texas, Tom Ramey, very, very talented writer. He was older than me, but he'd worked some in film as a prop guy and all that. Hadn't started writing until he was into his 30s or whatever. But he was very talented, and his stories got a lot of attention. He was nominated for and won the John W. Campbell Award in, I think, 77, I think, for the best new writer in the field. And he was working on his first novel, very promising, and he died of a massive heart attack at 42 years of age, and was found dead, slumped over the typewriter with a manuscript in the typewriter. And I was 32 years of age at that time, so he was only 10 years older than me. And up to that point, I'd been thinking, okay, well, I want to really try to go full time as a writer at some point, but I don't know if I'm quite ready yet. I don't know. I have plenty of time, But when Tom died, it made me think, well, do I have plenty of time? Who knows how much any time? I mean, this guy just wins the New Writer Award, and he's dead less than a year later. So it made me think, I better take my shot now. And if it fails, it fails. Then I'll go back and do something. So I resigned my teaching job and
gutsy thing to do.
Moved to Santa Fe because since I didn't have to have a job, I could move anywhere I want, and I'd fallen in love with Santa Fe the year before. So when I came down here, that's when I started as a writer, and I had some tough times going in, and then I had success, and then I had more tough times, and then I had more success. It's not as I tell young writers whenever I speak to them, freelance writing is not a career path for anyone who requires security.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not going to be you get promoted and promoted and promoted, and at some point you're the vice president, and then they give you a gold watch. No, it's not that. It's a constant gamble, and you're only as successful as your last project, and you can be king of the world one day, and then 2 years later, nobody wants to return your phone calls. Mm-hmm. So you better get used to that, and you better be comfortable with that. Mm-hmm.
What brought you to Hollywood?
The failure of my career as a novelist.
Thank you for that simple and forthright answer.
As I said, there are ups and downs. I won awards. I was nominated for awards for Hugos and Nebulas. I was a rising star, etc. I got a nice chunk of money from my first novel. I got even more for my second. I got even more for my third. I got even more, my first six-figure advance for my fourth novel, The Armageddon Reg, which was supposed to be my big breakthrough novel. It unfortunately failed to break through. In fact, it failed to sell at all. It was the worst selling of my four novels at that point. And suddenly I discovered that no one wanted my fifth novel, the one I was writing, because they said, oh, look, his last novel was a turkey. Got great reviews. It was nominated for a World Fantasy Award, but it just didn't sell. Oddly enough, though, a Hollywood producer, Phil DeGuerre, liked it and thought it had a feature film in it. So he optioned it. And Phil was a little different. I mean, I'd sold options before. That was a source of income for a lot of science fiction writers. People were always optioning the book, and they wouldn't pay much, $2,000 here, $5,000 there.
Just to explain, an option is a producer gives you a certain sum of money, usually a modest sum of money,
right,
to have the right to try to get the film or television show made.
So as you say, a modest sum of money, and then there's more money if they actually make it, which is called the pickup fee. Mm-hmm. So it's always like, all right, a $3,000 option against a $100,000 pickup fee in those days. These days the numbers are bigger, but I'd never gotten any of the pickup fees, but I'd gotten a number of the options. But usually just, okay, somebody's going to option your book or your short story, and you get $3,000, $5,000, whatever. And if you have three or four of them out there, it's a nice addition to your income. But I never met any of these people. They all went through the agents and all that. What was different with Phil DeGuerre is when he optioned Armageddon Reg, he wanted to meet me and talk about it. So he flew me out to L.A., and we had meetings about it. And he told me how he's going to approach the screenplay and how he wanted to film it and all that. He did several drafts of it. He never got it made. But Phil was a very successful television producer. And he had worked for Steve Cannell for a number of years on his shows. He had created the show Simon and Simon. He created Whiz Kids, which was not a big hit, but was one of the first shows about computer hackers ever done on television. CBS said, well, what do you want to do next? You have these shows. And he said, I want to bring back the Twilight Zone. And when he brought back the Twilight Zone, he reached out to science fiction and fantasy writers. He didn't just go to the usual television writers that were working on cop shows or lawyer shows. He said, well, this is going to be science fiction fantasy. Let's have people that. He brought in Harlan Ellison as one of the things, and he reached out to me and said, would you like to try a script? And, if my career as a novelist had been flourishing, and at the time I might have said, no, I'm happy where I am. I don't know anything about script writing. But it wasn't. I was, getting increasingly desperate here about what the hell am I going to do here? Nobody even wants to buy this new novel of mine. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'll try a script. And next thing I knew, I was on staff on Twilight Zone.
And describe being on staff on that particular show. Every show is a little different. Was it a collaborative writing process?
Not collaborative, no. Writers' rooms these days are much more collaborative, even in drama. Back in the 80s, sitcoms were largely collaborative, where everybody would sit down and throw jokes at each other. But no, I came up with ideas. A lot of mine were based on existing short stories. I really had a good knowledge of the literature. And that's when Phil first offered me a thing. I thought, well, I don't know how to write a teleplay or a screenplay, so maybe I should concentrate on learning the form. So rather than trying to come up with a story of my own. I said, I'll make it easy for myself here. And I sent Phil like 30 stories that I Xerox. Photocopy machines were easier in those days than they had been in the 60s. I sent Phil like 30 stories. I said, these will all make good Twilight Zone. Pick one, and I will write a screenplay of it. And so I wrote 5 scripts for Twilight Zone. But it was not a case of, we would meet with the other writers, and I would say, well, I want to do this story. And Phil and the others would say, go ahead, and then I would write a treatment. This is where I was forced to write outlines for the first time. I tried to convince Phil, no, just let me write it. It'll be good. No, we have to have an outline. The network has to approve it. The studio has to approve it. The censors have to approve it. Everybody has to approve it. And, you do that, and the other writers in the room would give you notes, and then you go back and write your first draft, meet with them, and they give you notes. But nobody else writes it but you, at least in those days. So...
But that already was a big change from sitting alone in your room typing away.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I had, earlier in my career, I had attended a number of writers' workshops, like the Milford Writers' Workshop that Damon Knight founded, and I founded one in Chicago when I lived there, the Windy City Writers' Workshop. Same idea, a bunch of writers get together once a month, everybody brings a story, you critique each other's stories. And it was a useful process, I think, especially for young writers. The writer's room in Twilight Zone reminded me a lot of that, except, these weren't just stories you wrote for yourself and hoping to sell to amazing. These were teleplays that were going to go on the air in a couple weeks.
So this was accompanied by a move to Los Angeles?
No, actually, well, yes and no. I love Santa Fe, and I had a house here. My wife was here. We weren't married at the time, but we were living together. She didn't want to move to Los Angeles. She didn't like Los Angeles. And, when at first I was like writing for Twilight Zone on a freelance basis. And then when they added me to the staff, they sent me a 6-week contract. I said, what, I'm gonna sell my house and buy a new house? Or actually, I couldn't afford to buy a house in Los Angeles. Santa Fe is a much lower thing, so I'm going to sell my house. I won't own a house anymore. I'll be living in Los Angeles, and I got 6 weeks guaranteed to me, and then it could all be over. And then what the hell do I do? So instead, I moved into an Oakwood apartment.
Ah, yes.
And I lived in various Oakwoods over the years. I've found a couple guest houses that I would rent for periods of time. But the minute the show wrapped or was canceled or whatever, I would head right on back to Santa Fe to the house, which I still own to this day.
And but your TV career did continue.
Yeah, for about 10 years. I was on Twilight Zone for a season and a half, and then we were canceled. And then I did a couple things from Max Headroom, although I was never on staff there, none of which were ever produced, which was unfortunate. And then I got hired on Beauty and the Beast, which had just been picked up by CBS, and I was on that for all 3 seasons, rising up through the ranks from, I think on Twilight Zone I was staff writer. You always know staff writer is the lowest position you can have because it's the only one that actually has writer in the title. And then you move up to story editor and executive story editor, and that's
my favorite, executive consultant.
Yes. I only got to story editor on Twilight Zone, but on Beauty and the Beast I started out as executive story editor, and then I got to co-producer and producer and co-supervising producer, and moving up the ranks. And that lasted 3 seasons. And at the end of that, so that's basically my first 5 years of my 10 years in Hollywood.
I'm going to interrupt you here because I want to ask you about being a producer. Now, you were more than just writing a script. You were involved in actually translating that script into a filmed episode.
Yes and no. To a certain extent, I'd always been involved in that. I mean, Phil DeGuerre, who ran Twilight Zone, involved the writers in every aspect of it. That's not true on every show. I mean, what you learn if you're working in television is there's an awful lot depends on the personality of the showrunner. I had some close friends who worked on Star Trek, for example, and there the writers were kept out of everything. They weren't allowed to have any voice in casting. They weren't allowed to have anything in post production. We don't want you. You just writers stay and write and keep your nose out of the other stuff. That was certainly never true on the shows I worked at. Phil DeGuerre brought us in. I was in casting sessions. I went to the editing room. I didn't really. I wish I'd gotten more into post production. I never really got into that very much. I was still concentrating on learning the craft of writing teleplays and all that. But we watched dailies. We visited the set. We talked to directors. We worked out things. I remember on my first script. I remember the time I made a small suggestion to the director, which he liked and took, and that really gave me a sense of, oh yeah,
that's a big deal.
It was a big deal. Yeah. And then when I went to Beauty and the Beast, the same thing with Ron Koslow. The writers were involved in every aspect of doing that. So the change from being a story editor to being a co-producer or producer really did not have a lot of impact. But I was always involved in the producing side.
And did you enjoy all of that?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
It's because it's helping to realize your idea.
It's also a big difference from what you talked about, the sitting all alone in a room with in the old days, a blank sheet of paper, now with a blank computer screen. There's a social aspect to working in television or film. That is really great. I mean, you go in the morning and there are people there, and you have an assistant or a secretary who brings you a cup of coffee, and you work on your script, but then you have a story meeting on somebody else's script, and then then there's dailies to watch, and if they're shooting your script or even sometimes someone else's script, you visit the set and talk with the director and the actors. Once or twice they even dragged me in to do a cameo, which was fun too. Mm-hmm. And all of that is fun. I mean, it's who is it? There's a famous quote. There's Orson Welles maybe said it: the greatest toy set that anyone can have. I mean, I remember once I had a script that had some guns in it, and suddenly the prop guy is showing up my place with all these fake machine guns. Well, which one do you want? You want this one here, or do you want this one? And I'm getting into that. So it is fun. The other side, though, and this is a coin that definitely has two sides, is working with all of those people is fun, but working with all those people can also be very frustrating because they have ideas of their own, which may not coincide with your ideas.
Too many cooks sometimes.
And you wind up having these tussles for creative control or creative vision, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and it all depends on who you're working with. You have layers above you. Like when I write a book, it's pretty much mine. I mean, I have an editor who gives me good suggestions, and sometimes I take what she suggests, sometimes I don't. But if I don't, then it's my call. But that's not true in television or film. You got the studio, you got the network, and in those days you had the standards and practices too, which not a problem with HBO, but it definitely was a problem with CBS and ABC. You never knew what kind of curveball the censors would throw you in. Of course, that's ultimately what drove Harlan Ellison off Twilight Zone, when the censors killed an episode he had written, which oddly enough was a story I had brought to Twilight Zone. So in some ways, I was involved in that whole ugly scenario, and that can be very frustrating. You want to tell your story your own way, and there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And the cooks who write the checks ultimately have the most power. So you always got to deal with what the network wants, what the studio wants, and sometimes, particularly when you're trying to develop new shows, You even have to deal with like preview audiences and preview cards and focus groups
Ouch.
and all of that stuff, which is, yeah, anathema to just telling the stories that you want to tell.
Did you write pilots for proposed or prospective
Yeah, that
series?
was my second 5 years in Hollywood. You know, my first 5 years were on Twilight Zone and Beauty and the Beast largely, and you know there were good times and bad times. There was stress, there was fights and all that, but at the end, these were ongoing series. So I would write a script and we'd rewrite it, and it'd be worked on, and then it would be approved, and it would be cast, and it would be shot, and millions of people would see it, and there was certainly a satisfaction in that. The second 5 years, I was making more money than ever, but I had overall deals. I wrote screenplays. I wrote pilots. All of them seemed very promising at some point, but then none of them ultimately got made. And I discovered that temperamentally I'm not suited for that. There are people in Hollywood who are perfectly fine with that, who have terrific careers where they write 40 screenplays and 2 of them get made, and they just go on. But after 5 years, it was driving me crazy. I spend a year of my life, create a world, create all these characters that you fall in love with a little, and then they decide, nah, we're not going to do this. We got something similar. The focus group didn't like it. Whatever the hell it is, but what else you got, And then you have to do it all over again. And after 5 years of that, I said, this is not for me. I'm going to go back to books and see. It's been a long time since Armageddon Rag. Maybe they've forgotten how badly it sold. And I came up with Game of Thrones.
And how did that go for you?
I'm hopeful.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
We'll find an audience, yeah.
We always say if people could figure out how to bottle success, they would have done it already.
Exactly.
If it was a science, then it would be a science. It's not. And that's, hearing your sort of journey of New Jersey to Santa Fe with a little trip to LA in the middle. It's I think I'm glad that you speak to writers. I'm glad that you go and sort of impart the wisdom you've got, because I think the thing that not enough people get to hear is the process, and the time it takes, and the failures that happen first, because that to me is absolutely what makes this business crazy, is dealing with failure and rejection constantly, and then, like you're saying, and then having to keep being creative. You give them something that you've written, and they go, "We don't like this. Give us another one." You go, thanks.
And it never ends.
No.
It's not a case where and I try to say this to the young writers too. It's not a case where you get rejection early and then you achieve success and you're just a success forever. I was a success in the 70s and early 80s. Armageddon Rag looked to be a huge success when it sold. I mean, they paid me a 6-figure advance for it. First time I'd achieved that. Every one of my books was getting a bigger advance. So when it failed commercially, it really took me by surprise. I think emotionally I just thought, well, this is my career arc, and it's just, going to go uphill. I wasn't prepared for the down. And
but who is,
And yeah, you see that in Hollywood. I mean, the internet really brings it home to you. I mean, there are things on YouTube, people making these videos. There's a whole series of them of like famous actors. Why Hollywood won't cast so and so anymore?
Yes.
Why
yes,
Hollywood
yes,
won't
yes,
cast
yes.
that? And you look at that and say, these are Oscar-winning actors. These are actors who starred in huge blockbusters, and Hollywood won't cast them anymore because they made a turkey or two, or in some cases they made a very good film that just for whatever people don't see. And the same thing is true of writers, screenwriters, directors, showrunners in television. You can seem to own the world one day, and the next day you're sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. I mean, where are all the great directors of like the movie directors of the '70s? I know some of them have died, but others are still around. But you don't hear about them anymore. What happened to them?
Yeah,
You know?
they're no longer the flavor of the month.
Right. Right.
We talk about that because it's such a time changes. We got that, but think about, like, for example, Mad About You. When I was growing up, it was one of the biggest shows on television.
Right.
And Helen Hunt was huge, and so was Paul Reiser.
Right.
Then they disappeared for a while. And she's in As Good as It Gets and all that sort of, but then there's this gap. And I'll meet people who don't know who they are. Now, several years ago, if I would have said the name Helen Hunt, you would have gone, oh, well, she's nominated. She always gets nominated. She's a great actress. She does all this stuff. And then Paul Reiser started to get fame again because he was on Stranger Things.
Right.
It's just so careers, they don't have one trajectory. There is no such thing. And as you say, you can have success and then fall. And it's I think that it takes a lot of nerve and a whole lot of guts to be able to do it.
It takes something. It takes something. I mean, it's different for writers and for directors and for actors. I think. Game of Thrones is largely filmed in Belfast. We're actually in 10 different countries, but Belfast in Northern Ireland was our main location. So, with a few exceptions, like Peter Dinklage from New Jersey, most of our cast have been British and Irish actors. And it's fascinating to talk to them and see the whole different way it's looked at there. I mean, they go to these drama schools, and they expect if they get out of drama schools, they'll get work, and many of them do get work. And the whole emphasis there is on being an actor, not being a star.
Mm-hmm.
And you get people who have been huge stars, leading people in Britain, and then you see them in small roles and supporting roles in something, and why did that big star take the supporting role? Well, it's a good part, and they weren't doing anything that week. The whole American system is different. Like once you achieve a leading man thing, you don't want to take a small part in somebody else's movie. That's beneath you now. So instead, they wind up doing nothing, which I think is foolish. I think the British model is better.
Yeah.
The British model incorporates theater and film and television
Right.
in a rotation, depending on where the work is and when the work arrives. Now, did you find that your years in Hollywood affected your subsequent approach to writing? You've already indicated that you freed your imagination. And that was one of the reasons you wanted to get back to writing novels.
Yeah, I think it was a good experience for me. I think it improved my dialogue because when you're writing a screenplay format, the dialogue really gets brought home to you by the format. So if you have Bill, and then he's giving a speech that takes up the rest of the page, it's probably not good unless it's a Shakespearean soliloquy or something. You can do that occasionally, but don't do it regularly here. Don't have people giving speeches to each other. So smaller, tighter dialogue, it improves your ear for that. Structure. William Goldman in that great book, Adventures in the Screenplay, nobody knows anything was one of his maxims. The other thing is structure. Structure is everything. So I think it also improved my sense of structure, working in those that kind of situation.
And then tell us about the experience of Game of Thrones coming to life on film. Did you feel like you were surrendering your book to these two talented
D&D.
guys?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I actually turned down a number of previous offers. I was in a fortunate position that the books were doing very well. Well, first of all, I had the 10 years in Hollywood. I'd socked away money from that, so I wasn't under any immediate pressure. And then the novels started doing progressively well. Game of Thrones did okay. Clash of Kings did better and hit the bestseller list for the first time. Storm of Swords did better and was higher on the bestseller list. Feast for Crows was number 1 on the bestseller list. So I was in a very secure position financially, so there was no pressure on me there. And when the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies had come out around that time, and those had been huge hits. So suddenly Hollywood is very imitative. Suddenly everybody wanted to do epic fantasy, and all of the big epic fantasies that were out there, and they were a number because it was a very popular genre. People started buying up the rights or optioning them, and so of course they came looking for mine, and I had a number of meetings with people who wanted to do it as a feature, but then I would have these meetings with them, and I'd say, it's just too big. How are you going to do this feature? Well, we've decided Jon Snow's the central character. We're going to pare away everybody else and just focus on Jon Snow. Or some said Daenerys. And others said, no, we'll do it. We'll make the first movie, and then if that's successful, we'll make more movies. Well, that gets you Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials. They do one movie. It's not successful. You never get the rest of the series. It's ultimate creative coitus interruptus here. And I didn't like the idea of paring away all of the other characters just to do that. So I said, no thanks. I'll not do that. It was only when I had the meeting with David and Dan, and they said all the right things, and they said, because it got me thinking, previously I had thought, this can't be done. But then when I got these offers, can it be done? How can it be done? Well, we need a sufficient budget, and I don't think it can be done for feature films. I mean, Peter Jackson took 3 movies to do Lord of the Rings, and the entire Lord of the Rings thing is the size of one of my books. So I had like 3 out by the time I got the first inquiry. So okay, if you're going to be a 9-movie guarantee, then maybe we can talk here. But we're going to need at least 18 hours to get all the material in here. And of course, nobody was willing to do that. But then I said, well, television. Television is the way to do it, not movies. But we can't do it. I'd worked for CBS. I'd worked to a limited extent for ABC. They're not going to let the sex and the violence, the levels that I have in Game of Thrones in there. We're going to wind up with a kiddie version, Bowdlerized. Both of the shows that I was on, and where I was on staff, Twilight Zone and Beauty and the Beast. Both of those shows were put on in the 8:00 time slot. After, in both cases, Phil DeGuerre on one hand and Ron Koslow told the same story about how when they were developing the shows, they were sure it would be a 10:00 show because they wanted to do adult kind of things. But then when it actually came to scheduling, no, we're on 8:00, and then they say, well, you're on 8:00, but you can still do the same shows. We won't do that. Well, that's the programming people were saying that. Then you actually try to do some of that, and then you get the censors, the standards and practice say, you're an 8:00 show. That is the family hour. It's too scary. Take that out. And and you said damn 10 times in this show. We only allow 5 dams per hour. I wasn't going to go for any of that on Game of Thrones. So the one thing that occurred to me was HBO, and that's what David and Dan said. And it was the marriage made in heaven. But there's always some trepidation because you're letting your kid out to, you're letting someone adopt your kid, and you don't know what the adoptive parent is going to be like. There was also some tough decisions for me because I did have those 10 years in television. I had tried to create my own show. I had tried to be a showrunner. Now, here's the show going forward, but I'm not the showrunner. I wrote, for the first 4 seasons, I wrote 1 script per season. But I'm still trying to finish the books. As you know. I couldn't justify taking off a year or 2 years or 3 years to actually be a part of this show, which would have involved moving to Belfast and, writing, instead of just 1 script per season, maybe writing 3 or 4 scripts per season. I mean, I wrote 13 episodes of Beauty and the Beast. I wrote 5 episodes of Twilight Zone. If I had been a big part of Game of Thrones, I could have done that, but it would have meant that the books didn't get written. There's only so many hours in a day. But that was a tough decision. But it worked out pretty well. So
Yeah.
I think
At least you recognized it, though. You know, you recognized sort of what worked for you and what didn't.
also I was older. You know, I do think being a showrunner on a television series is it's a tough job. It's
Yeah.
a grueling job. It's 24 hours a day. I mean, you're not only writing scripts and doing the Twilight Zone. You're working with the directors. You're doing casting. You're on the set to solve production problems, of which there are always some. Especially on something as big as Game of Thrones, which is shooting in 5 countries simultaneously, and gigantic budgets and all of that. And I, because of my career arc, I had gotten into this business relatively late compared to a lot of other people. I was already well into my 30s before I got that Twilight Zone job. And in my 40s, I could have taken on being a showrunner. I don't think by the time I hit my 60s, it was something I really wanted to tackle as my thing. So handing it off was the thing that made sense, and it worked out wonderfully, I think, for everyone concerned.
What level of involvement did you ultimately have? Did they consult you on a regular basis? Was it only when they hit a snag or one
Do
up
we
a
want
blind
these
alley?
boobs? Do we want those boobs?
Well, I was pretty heavily involved in the beginning, in the early seasons. As I said, the first 4 seasons, I wrote a script each year, and we talked constantly. When we started out, I had 10 years of television experience, and they had no television experience. Although, David Benioff had done films.
Right.
And also novels as well. They'd both done novels. But as the show got up and, more and more progressing, then I pulled back to concentrate more on the books. And there was less consultation because there didn't need to be quite as much. I'd be interested in your insights, as you've been, of course, associated with movies your entire career here. But I see a real sea change happening in American popular entertainment now,
no
where
question.
television is replacing movies as the central pole here of our popular culture. It seems to me television has become the place where drama is, and movies have become for spectacle.
Yes. For spectacle and for escapism, for a certain brand of escapism, that so-called 4-quadrant audience that they all want to try to reach. And TV is where adults, where grown-ups can find something to watch with some meat on its bones.
Right.
And I don't think there's any question. I don't think there's any debate about it. And when you see the level of talent now ready, if not eager, to be involved in television because they know they can do good, solid work there.
Yeah, even in the 80s, when I was working in television on shows like Twilight Zone, Beauty and the Beast, there was a real sense in Hollywood that movies were where all the best people were.
Yeah.
That's where the best directors, the best actors, and the best writers worked. And television was for the people who weren't quite on that level.
Yeah.
It was also, we talked about this a lot, it was considered a step down. If you were if you were a film
It was the
actor
stepchild.
and you had to go and be in TV, it was like, why? What do they do? Who do they make angry? Now it really is incredible, and I think for a lot of actors, because there's this limited series thing,
Right.
where you can now get Reese Witherspoon, Laura Dern,
Meryl Streep,
Nicole Kidman,
Nicole
Kidman,
on one
Shailene
show.
Woodley, like all together. You
And
know?
also it doesn't take as much of their time because
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
10 episode orders or
Oh, yeah.
13 episode orders, as opposed to in the 80s it was all 22 episodes.
Exactly.
And you go back even earlier, it's 39 episodes a
Yep.
season.
Yeah.
If you go back to the
Yep.
50s and early 60s, so that's pretty well your whole year. You're going to be playing your one role in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing,
But there's not necessarily. I mean, the length of these television shows, when you look at it over multiple seasons, it's you got a 90-hour story,
yeah.
or a 110-hour story, or something like that, and you can create a character like Walter White that you can take through amazing, or Tony Soprano, such rich, deep characters that you see, and characterization is really, I think, the heart of storytelling.
I'm amazed by American Horror Story because no wonder you have these great actors who want to stay on. They get to do something different every season.
Right.
You get some of the people on there. Sarah Paulson is one of the greatest actresses we have. And she gets to do a little bit of everything. Dennis O'Hare, same thing. So it's exciting to me. TV right now is exciting.
And it's where the conversation is. There's just no question about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, the zeitgeist is TV, and movies can still be everything movies always were. Always
was.
And you can hit that brass ring and make a gazillion dollars in one weekend, which no television show can do. So movies still have not only their place, movies are still viable in every sense of that word. But TV is so fertile now and so rewarding, both for the creative community and for us in the audience.
Right.
And there's no reason they can't coexist and stay that way for a long, long time to come.
Well, I mean, a lot is changing, and I don't know what it's going to be like when it settles down. I mean, you have the traditional networks, you have cable and premium cable. They're all making shows, and now you have all these streaming services.
Yep.
And more of them every time, and more people are creating content. It's
Yes, by the
really
way,
like books. I mean, when I go to a bookstore, here's a new Stephen King, here's a new book by some best-selling author, and then here's a bunch of books that I've never heard of by people I don't know, but that cover looks interesting. Let me pick that up. And I never had that experience with television. I mean, even as a kid, there were shows I never watched, but I was aware that they existed. I don't think I ever saw an episode of Little House on the Prairie, but I knew that there was a show out there called Little House on the Prairie. Now I go onto Netflix and I, what's this? It's in its third season? I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
What's this?
Yeah.
What's this other one? That looks sort of interesting, you know? And
And they're international.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how long will it last? Is this a tech bubble that's going to burst? I don't know. But you just gotta take it as it comes. And
meanwhile, there you are, still writing what we think of, I think, and always have thought of as books.
books, yes.
Books are good. I like books. I love books. I always have. Like you, I spent more time in a library than I ever did outdoors growing up.
Right.
And books have deep meaning to me. And whether you choose to read them in, I still like reading them between covers, but I read some stuff on a tablet too. And if you're reading, then you're reading, and that's the same activity it always has been, and with the same level of engagement that it's always offered.
There are different ways of approaching ultimately what is the story.
Yeah.
You know, the story exists apart from the medium.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, going all the way back then to my beginnings, I was a comic book fan.
Mm-hmm.
That was the fandom that I was involved in, writing superhero stories for little comic fanzines. And of course, I read Spider-Man and Batman and all the DC and Marvel superheroes, and there were also kind of war comics, and there were funny animal comics and other comics there. But there was also a line called Classics Illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back on it, that was my introduction to most of the great stories of American and English literature. I read the Classics Illustrated versions of War of the Worlds and Time Machine before I read the books. I read the Classics Illustrated version of Hawthorne and Dickens and all of these things, and Moby Dick. And you got the story. The story is there now. Then ultimately you'll see the Moby Dick movie, and ultimately you may read the Moby Dick book. But you kind of know the story. There's Ahab, there's a white whale, there's Call Me Ishmael, all of that stuff, and our world, our culture is suffused with these stories. I think, how many people know the story of Moby Dick? How many have actually read the Melville novel? And yet the story is so powerful that it's become universal to every literate person, I think, in our society, whether you crack the novel or not. And there are different ways to experience the story. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I address when people ask me about the changes in Game of Thrones. As lavish as that production was, as big budget as it was, they still couldn't include all the characters. My books are bigger, and and it would have had, instead of 8 seasons, 6 of which were 10 episodes, and then 2 shorter seasons at the end, would have had to go, 20 seasons of 13 to 15 episodes to possibly get in, and even then I would have had to eliminate things. So, I often use the analogy of Gone with the Wind, and say, how many children did Scarlett O'Hara have? What's the answer to that? She had 3 in the novel, 1 in the movie. And of course, she really had none, because she's a fictional character who didn't exist. So you can tell the story as you want with 1 child or with 3 child. Right. There's no right answer or wrong answer there, as long as you get the essence of the story.
Right, as they did with the Harry Potter films, where those books were so chunky that even with the best intentions, they couldn't include everything. Right. Not every story thread, not every character, but they tried to capture the essence of each book. And yet I found that they didn't capture the author's voice. That's what I missed when I did a comparative, very superficial comparative study, was that I heard the wit and the Britishness of that wit in J.K. Rowling's work that wasn't necessarily present in the movies, as good as the movies were. So, again, as you say,
Rowling did have a lot to say about those early, particularly the early ones, or really the whole thing, because the books were such mega successes. Every studio in Hollywood wanted them. So she was able to get, it's easy if you're successful in Hollywood to get a lot of money. What's harder to get any meaningful measure of creative control.
Right.
They'd rather, yes, I'd like script approval. Well, would you like an extra $1 million instead? No, I really want script approval. How about $2 million? That's the kind of conversations you have. But Rowling could get beyond that. I understand. I mean, I don't know her or anything, so this is just gossip that at a very early stage they wanted to move those books to America. And she said, absolutely not. These are British books, and they're going to continue to take place in the UK. It's not going to be a suburb of Chicago. Well, I've been very lucky with David and Dan and HBO, but there's a lot of properties that are optioned or made in Hollywood where I think the adaptations go too far. They go too far. I think if you're going to take on, this is certainly my standard, if I'm going to adapt something, I want to love it. Yes, there are always going to be challenges and questions and things you have to change for budgetary reasons or for script reasons. But if you love the initial material, you'll fight and you'll do everything you can to preserve it.
In rounding this out, I want to bring it back to movies for a very specific reason. We are sitting in your movie theater.
Right.
We are sitting in a theater that you purchased 6 years ago. And tell us how that came about, what your hope was, what your dream, if any, was.
Obviously, it's to become rich off a one-screen theater, right? That was the discussion we had. This is what you do.
Yes,
when
you
wanna
can
just
make
strike
a
gold.
small fortune running
Yeah.
a single screen movie theater.
Yeah.
As long as you start with a large fortune.
There you go.
Well, the Jean Cocteau was Santa Fe's first art house. It was opened in 1977 by four hippies. It was called the Collective Fantasy. In this building, the building actually goes back to 1912 or so, and was a lot of other things. And they ran it from 77 to 84, I think, when it was sold, and the new owner renamed it the Jean Cocteau, put up the marquee, did the basic layout of what we see here. And then from 84 until 2006, it ran under a variety of owners. And I always loved this movie theater. It was a nice, comfortable theater. They were showing as the first art house in town. This is where you always saw the Woody Allen films. This is where you saw Spike Lee films, other stuff, foreign films. Other art houses came up subsequently, though. And they had great popcorn. I always love that. Popcorn is essential with a movie theater. They had great popcorn with real butter and Parmesan cheese and other toppings that you could put on it. And then those last owner was the Transluck Corporation. In 2006, they closed all of their entire chain of single-screen movie theaters in the Southwest, including the Cocteau. And I only live a few minutes from here, so I would drive past this place frequently and see it just all boarded up with the sign in the window for sale, lease. And I would always think, I love that theater. I wish someone would reopen that theater. And then one day, for whatever reason, I was driving past it, and I thought, I love that theater. I wish someone would reopen that theater. And then I thought, why don't I reopen that theater? Hey, I can do that. So I inquired and bought the building, and we did a little renovation. We had to install. We still have our 35 millimeter projectors, but we had to
Bless
install
you.
digital because nobody is doing films on film anymore except Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino, bless their souls. So we had to do that, and we refurbished the lobby. This room really is not refurbished very much. We put in a slightly larger screen and added and improved the sound. And we reopened in August of 2013. My first manager and booker was John Bowman, who I believe you know. He ran it for me for a number of years, and it's been fun. It's a tough gig. A lot has changed since the Cocteau opened in the 70s and 80s.
This is the definition of a labor of love.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Although our screen is slightly larger than the one when I bought the theater, it still doesn't compare to the giant screen at the multiplexes. And for a long time, in 13 and 14 and 15, we were really blocked out of having the bigger movies because clearance, the policy called clearance, where somebody would have the Avengers movie, so nobody else within 5 miles could show the Avengers movie. So we didn't get any of the big movies, and then even for the art house movies, we're competing with the two other art houses in town, and sometimes we didn't get that either. So we're showing a lot of smaller movies that don't have big television advertising campaigns. They don't have full-page spreads in the newspapers. How do you get people in to see these movies that they've never heard of? You're relying on reviews and word of mouth and all that. But we always did a combination of new movies plus old movies. I loved showing classic old films. And then we started doing other events. We have magicians in here 4 or 5 times a year. We do have stand-up comedy, live music.
A burlesque.
Yeah, we
a
have
Game of Thrones burlesque.
we have burlesque shows. Yeah, Suicide Girls have done a couple things here, And we have a lot of author events, like the one you'll be doing
Yes.
tonight here, where you'll be talking to a crowd and then signing a bunch of your books. We've done very well with that. So, it's anything we can do to put people in the seats. And we still have the best popcorn in town.
Good.
It's organic popcorn that we get from the Amish in Indiana. And we have real butter, none of this crankcase oil that they put on it at the multiplexes anymore, with a variety of like 20 different toppings that you can sprinkle on it, Parmesan cheese or brewer's yeast or chili pepper or, caramel if you want sweet stuff. So
My husband is a popcorn aficionado, and
is
his
you?
his
Oh.
eyes just lit up.
Very good.
Popcorn,
Well,
you
we'll all
say.
be sampling the popcorn
Yes.
today.
very good.
That's for sure. Well, you actually do a service for your community.
Yeah.
Running a theater like this, it's the Lord's work. It's missionary work, and so you're to be commended for that, George, for sure.
I look at it that way, and I love old movie theaters. This one isn't as old as some. It's not a grand movie palace, but
But it's got a wonderful marquee.
I yes, it does. Yes, it does. I just I think movies are going to be with us for a long time, but I'm not so certain movie theaters are.
Well,
They're dying all over the country, especially not only single screens, but even duplexes and fourplexes are fading out and being replaced by 12 plexes and 14 plexes. I mean, here in Santa Fe, we're competing against the Regal 14 screen, and then just 2 blocks away, the Violet Crown 11 screen. And now with all these streaming services, Netflix, Amazon, and all that stuff, people are more and more watching movies at home. And I understand the comfort of that. I know people who like to do that. Well, I can sit around in my underwear and watch my movie. I
Yeah.
can stop it whenever I want to go to the toilet or something like that. All right, fine. Yeah, that's true. But for me, there's still always a magic of sitting in a auditorium with a crowd of other people and experience it at the same time. I mean, it makes comedies, for one thing, much funnier when people around you
yes.
start laughing.
No question.
It's contagious. And there are even certain moments in movies. I remember the first time I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the scene where the swordsman is challenging Indiana, and he pulls out his gun and just shoots the guy. You see that in a movie theater surrounded by people. Nobody's expecting it, at least back then, and an audible gasp goes up from the audience. Mm-hmm. You watch that at home by yourself, it's nothing. It's a nothing movement.
Yeah.
It's that surprise that you get, the shared experience of a movie theater.
Absolutely.
And we're losing that. A couple of years ago, I had a convention I was attending in San Antonio, Texas. So I like to take road trips. So some friends of mine took a road trip, and we stayed off the interstate. We went down through Carlsbad, New Mexico on small roads, and then curved into Texas and went, through small Texas towns kind of close to the Mexico border till we hit San Antonio. And what struck me is in every single one of those small towns, there's a dead movie theater at the heart of it. Some of them are in ruins and collapsing. Some of them look like they closed yesterday, and you could turn a key and get them going again. But you got the marquee, you got the for sale or lease signs, and next to them is like a dead diner and stores, and it's these movie theaters were the hearts of those small communities.
Yes.
And now, instead, you're driving out and you see houses, satellite dish, satellite dish, satellite dish. Everybody living in isolation anymore. We've lost that sense of shared experience, and that helps tie community together.
it does. We put on our own film festival for the first time this year for the reason you're talking about, because we want people together.
Right.
We want an audience together. And it was joyous, and that's why when we say to you we love this, we mean that,
Right.
because this is very important, and we're thrilled to be here.
And I can't wait for that Parmesan. Ooh, you have whet my appetite, sir. You really have.
Yeah, that's my favorite too.
We're a simple
All
people.
the toppings. Yeah.
You are so kind to give us your time today and to open the doors of, literally open the
Yes,
doors.
literally open the
of
door
your
for us.
theater
Yes.
For us to come and do this. And we're very, very grateful to you,
Oh, my
George.
pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
And people know where to follow you, don't they? We don't have to.
GRR speaking. Grr.
Right.
Which, can I say, when emailing with the lovely folks who work with you, they refer to you as GRR. So I've just taken to saying grr. Grr says we can come next week. Grr.
They're yeah. Some of the social media stuff is in self-defense. There were fake me's out there for
Oh,
a
I,
while.
yeah.
You gotta watch out for that too.
Yeah.
But
Didn't have that in fanzines.
Yeah.
no fake people.
Nobody had to verify anything about a
Yeah,
fanzine.
right. You didn't get a blue check when you started printing the fanzine?
No.
Just sticky quarters.
Just sticky
Yeah, right.
quarters. That's what it was all about, right?
If you remember nothing else from this show, sticky quarters. And I will put up, when this episode airs on leonardmaltin.com, I will put up photos of all the fanzines that my dad shared so you can see them for yourself.
That'd be great.
You're welcome.
And we should do our little closing plugs here.
You are at Leonard Maltin, and I am at Jesse Maltin on Instagram and Twitter. And you can go to leonardmaltin.com to see the fanzines, but also film reviews, book roundups, and all kinds of good stuff.
And before we let Leonard leave here today, we're going to make him sign a bunch of his books. So
Yes.
if you want an autographed book, go to the John Cocteau website, our autograph book session. His books, my books, are all available autographed there, and we've had many other authors through here. Neil Gaiman and Dennis Lehane, and most recently Marlon James.
Wow.
Alan Brennett, my old colleague from Twilight Zone. Creative Jack Reacher, Lee Child. They've all done events here recently, and autographed
great.
books of all of them are available for.
I'm in very lofty company. That's very
Yeah.
flattering. Great. Well, take advantage of that website, folks, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Maltin on Movies is sponsored today by Legion M, the first fan-owned entertainment company. They've got a lot of good stuff going on, and you can learn about it at legionm.com.